So on today's episode, I've got a Mad Lad Commander deck just for you. That's right, this Commander concept is so off the wall, you could consider it mad. So without further ado, let's jump into the Commander and talk about what this deck wants to do. And the commander for this deck is Oswald Fiddlebender, a fantastic mono-white commander that has a ton of potential. It is a 2/2 Gnome Artificer that costs 1 and a white, and it has pay a white, tap, sacrifice an artifact, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. And activate only as a sorcery. Regardless, this is an incredibly powerful ability, essentially allowing you to tutor for and get directly into play artifacts from your deck, kind of like a pod, but instead of it being, birthing pod for creatures, this is pod for artifacts. Now, of course, this kind of a commander can be built in some incredibly brutal ways, in some incredibly powerful ways, and I'm not saying that this deck isn't powerful, but its objective is, well, let's just say, a bit different than probably any other Oswald Fiddlebender deck out there. Because this deck is going to be utilizing cards that basically see no play anywhere else, and for good reason. But for this deck, they are incredible. I mean, one of the cards literally sees play in 8 decks in total on EDH Rec. And not because of a color restriction, it literally, well, you'll see. I don't want to spoil everything just yet. Regardless, this deck is incredibly budget friendly. Every single card in it, including the commander, yes, there is a version of Oswald underneath $1, is underneath $1. And while going through the cards on this episode, I'm going to be breaking this deck down into different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And of course, if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out that deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into it so we can find out exactly what this Mad Lad deck wants to do. So first up, really quick, let's go through ramp. And when it comes to our ramp, we actually want to have a good amount of ramp cards that have different mana values. Because again, Oswald with that activation can sacrifice something like a mana rock and turn it into something else. And by having mana rocks with different converted mana costs, we increase our options in what we can go get with Oswald's ability. So first up, there's the 0 mana Everflowing Chalice, which is a fantastic mana rock, multi-kicker 2, enters the battlefield with that number of charge counters on it, tap for each charge counter on it. And then of course Arcane Signet, which taps for a white, Ebony Fly, which enters the battlefield, tap and taps for a colorless, but also, and you're going to find out why this is really important, we can actually turn it into a insect that has flying, and when it attacks, it gives another creature flying, and that can be crucial. Regardless, next up there's Liquid Metal Torque, which can tap for a colorless, or it can tap and make target non-land permanent and artifactish to other types until end of turn. Now, this can actually be very important because if we have something in play that isn't an artifact that we want to sacrifice, we can do so thanks to this. And speaking of sacrificing, next up there's Mind Zone, which you can sacrifice to draw a card, and Prize Statue, which is a fantastic new card. When it enters the battlefield, we make a treasure token, and when we sacrifice it with Oswald's ability, we're also going to make another treasure token when it hits our graveyard. And of course, keep in mind that those treasure tokens, of course, can be utilized for mana, or again with Oswald, we can sacrifice them to go get something with CMC 1. And there is a very, very, very important thing that we can get with that. Regardless, next up at 3 mana, we've got Commander Sphere, Letter of Acceptance, and Bonder's Ornament, each of which can tap to add 1 mana of any color, and they each can give us some cards. Commander Sphere can be sacrificed to draw a card. Letter of Acceptance, we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to draw a card. And Bonder's Ornament, we can pay 4 to tap and draw a card. Regardless, again, at 3 mana, these are fantastic candidates to be sacrificed with our commander's ability to ensure that we can get something that costs 4, and we'll get to it here in a bit, but something very important in this deck does cost 4. So, of course, we're also going to be running 2 other mana rocks at 3 with Mana Geode, which enters the battlefield, and we scry 1, and Patriarch Seal, which has pay 1 tap, untap target legendary creature you control. So with this, we can actually activate our commander's ability twice in a turn, which is huge. And finally, outside of actually ramping, we've got some ways to reduce the cost of our artifacts in this deck, and we're running an absurd amount of artifacts in this deck. So cards like Foundry Inspector and Joyous Familiar can save us a lot of mana throughout the game. Foundry Inspector says artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and Joyous Familiar is very similar. Historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. But now that we've talked about setting ourselves up, what is this deck trying to do? Well, this deck revolves around one card, and that card is, of course, the Golden Pig of this deck, the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Crackdown Construct. That's right, Crackdown Construct. This entire deck is built around this janky uncommon. It is a 2/2 artifact creature construct that costs 4, and it says, whenever you activate an ability of an artifact or creature that isn't a mana ability, Crackdown Construct gets ++1 until end of turn. So this might seem like a very strange thing to build a deck around, and yeah, it is. It definitely is, but there are some really spicy things that you can do with this. Now, of course, again, outside of mana abilities, we do have quite a bit of, abilities in this deck on artifacts and creatures, and cool, if we activate those, including our commander's ability, awesome, Crackdown Construct gets ++1. But of course, we wouldn't just build an entire deck around, just a couple of things, pumping this to make it into, like maybe like a 6/6 on our turn. That probably isn't going to really help us out all that much. What will help us out, though, are other artifacts that we can utilize to maybe activate, well, a couple more times than that. And again, thanks to our commander, we can not only tutor out this, but we can also tutor out another card that combos with this in a very spicy, janky, and awesome way. So again, with this entire deck literally being built around Crackdown Construct, yeah, I would say that this is the Golden Pig of the deck, and you'll see exactly how powerful this can become in a deck like this. Because, of course, Crackdown Construct has some very good friends in this deck with cards like Shuko, Plate Armor, and Chimeric Idol. And if you're wondering what in the world Chimeric Idol is, well, we'll get to it, and that is one of the cards that sees almost no play anywhere else. I think it sees play in like 70 or 80 decks in total. Regardless, let's start with Shuko. So Shuko is a very simple equipment that costs 1. It says equip creature gets +1/+0, but most importantly, it has equip 0. We pretty much don't care what in the world this does. It really doesn't matter all that much. It could say equip creature gets +0/+0. I mean, it wouldn't say that, but if it did, it wouldn't matter. All we care about is this has equip 0, which means that as long as we have Crackdown Construct in play and one other creature, like maybe our commander, we can go infinite with this. Because that equip ability is, of course, an ability on an artifact that is not a mana ability, so every single time we equip this to something, Crackdown Construct gets +1/+1. So we equip it to the construct, then we equip it to our commander, then we do it again and again and again, just moving it from one to the other an infinite number of times. Or I guess, okay, yes, magic rules, you need to specify a number, so let's just say 8 trillion, okay? So then Crackdown Construct gets +1,000,000,000,000,000, and now it is a 1,000,000,002 and /1,000,000,002. Regardless, it has basically infinite power. And actually, ironically, if we leave Shuko attached to it, it gets an extra little +1/+0. So just keep that in mind, although obviously that does not matter at all. So again, this tiny little 1 mana equipment that we can just get out with our commander by sacrificing something as simple as a treasure is incredibly impactful in this deck. But another equipment that can combo basically in the exact same way is Plate Armor. It is an equipment that costs 2 and a white, and it says equip creature gets +3/+3 and has ward 1. On top of that, it's got equip 3. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each other equipment you control. So yes, for this combination to work, we do need 3 other equipment in play. But as you'll see, we've got a ton of equipment in this deck, so we can very easily meet that requirement. And again, while +3/+3 and ward 1 is nice, and of course we can utilize that to maybe protect our commander at least a little bit before we get things set up, the most important part is this essentially, at the end of the day, is going to have equip 0 when we need it to. But now moving on to Chimeric Idol, again, that janky card that sees basically no play anywhere else, and for good reason. It has pay 0, tap all lands you control. Chimeric Idol becomes a 3/3 turtle artifact creature until end of turn. That is a very useless ability in a lot of circumstances, and one that has an incredibly hefty cost again. Paying 0, yeah, that's nothing, but tapping all lands you control, that is a hefty cost, but again, that is well worth it in this deck. So this is another fantastic option at 3 mana for us because, yeah, we can just activate that 0 an infinite number of times, or again, however many times we need to give Crackdown Construct plus a trillion, or whatever. Now, obviously, we would prefer something like Shuko because this does have the downside of us having to tap out, but still, in many circumstances, that's still going to be well worth it. Regardless, we still have some other combo cards to talk about with Hopping Automaton, which, again, this is the card that sees play in exactly 8 decks in total on EDH Rec, and for good reason, because it is a 2/2 that has pay 0. It gets -1/-1 and gains flying until end of turn. This card is really useless in a lot of circumstances, but with this deck, we absolutely love it, at least for one combat. Because essentially, what you can do is you can just keep activating this again and again and again, keeping all those on the stack, so Hopping Automaton's not getting -1/-1 until you need it to, and you just keep activating this again an infinite number of times, a trillion times, whatever it is. Yes, Hopping Automaton will get taken out, once 2 of those abilities, go through off the stack, but still, you still got to activate this ability an infinite number of times, again, however many times you need to pump Crackdown Construct. And of course, if we really need to, we do have ways to get this back, but yeah, it's just good to have another backup. And speaking of which, at 4 mana, we've got Chimeric Staff, which works in a somewhat similar way. By paying X, you make it into an XX construct artifact creature until end of turn, and yeah, basically all you have to do is just pay 0 into that. And again, in a very similar way to Hopping Automaton, you put it on the stack, and then you just keep activating it for the exact same X = 0 as many times as you want. Now, once one of those resolves, obviously, again, it's going to just, go away because it's going to be a 0/0 creature, so yeah. That's unfortunate, but again, that is okay because our Crackdown Construct is going to be infinitely large, and again, we do have ways to get this back if we need to. Though, of course, like I mentioned, we definitely prefer some of our previous combo pieces, especially Shuko, to these. Moving on, we do have some other ways to take advantage of some of our combo pieces with cards like Dollhouse of Horrors and Sculpting Steel. Dollhouse of Horrors has pay 1, tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, except it's a 0/0 construct artifact with other types, and it has... This creature gets ++1 for each construct you control. It gains haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So first up, if Oswald actually gets dealt with and we've got this in play, it might not be a bad idea actually to put Oswald into our graveyard and then utilize this to actually just exile it, get it back into our command zone from there, but then get a token copy that's hasty of Oswald, which then ironically could sacrifice itself for one of our combo pieces if we needed to. Of course, on top of that, this is able to get us back Hopping Automaton, which is of course another one of our combo pieces if we really want to go about it in that way. And actually, if we are really desperate, we can actually get Crackdown Construct back with this too. Now, obviously, that is a swing for the fences type of play though, because we are kind of putting all of our eggs in one basket at that point, because again, the deck does revolve around Crackdown Construct, and if it's exiled, well, there's no getting it back from there. That being said, if we're down to a one-on-one situation and we feel like we can actually get our Crackdown Construct through, we just exile it from our graveyard, get it back, and it's hasty, and then we do all those activations again and hopefully win from there. Next up, Sculpting Steel can help us out in a different way, though. It can enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield, which of course can be fantastic in combination with, well, Crackdown Construct, because what's better than one Crackdown Construct in this deck? 2. Because with that, then of course, in many situations, we can easily take out 2 players at once. Now, Sculpting Steel can also be utilized in a different way, to maybe copy another one of our combo pieces, maybe something like, again, that Hopping Automaton or Chimeric Idol, which again can help us on one turn, but might not be able to help us on the next turn unless we can get them back, so just having an extra copy of them can help us utilize our combo again. But yeah, overall, Sculpting Steel has a ton of flexibility with a deck like this. But now that we've talked about our combo, again, at the end of the day, Crackdown Construct is just basically an infinitely large creature, but we need to still be able to get it through. And of course, we have a ton of ways to do that, and again, a lot of these are at different converted mana costs because our commander can help us tutor them out, in a variety of ways with cards like Key to the City, Wedding Invitation, and Glaring Spotlight. Key to the City can be tapped and we discard a card, and up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. This is a fantastic card. And of course, on top of that, when it comes untapped, we can pay 2, and if we do, we draw a card. So on top of getting our golden pig through, this is a fantastic way to rummage. And speaking of card advantage, there's Wedding Invitation, which has when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and we can tap and sacrifice it, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. And then Glaring Spotlight can help us out in a variety of ways. Basically, it takes away hexproof from our opponent's creatures if we're targeting them, and by paying 3, we can sacrifice it, and creatures we control gain hexproof until end of turn and are unblockable this turn. So this not only can protect our creatures, but most importantly, it can help get Crackdown Construct through. Moving on, next up, we've got some equipment that can help us out, and again, like I mentioned earlier, for plate armor, we've got plenty of equipment to spare. Gilded Pinions, Fleet Feather Sandals, and Cloak of the Bat, just to name a few. When Gilded Pinions enters the battlefield, we get a treasure token, which again can be a fantastic way either for some temporary ramp, or, you know, also just to go get Shuko. And of course, Gilded Pinions says equipped creature has flying, which in many situations is a great way to get through on a lot of opponents. So in a somewhat similar way, we've got Fleet Feather Sandals and Cloak of the Bat, each of which do the exact same thing. Equipped creature has flying and haste. So this can be a great way to swing right away with our construct, or if we're not set up quite just yet, we can actually attach this to Oswald to activate right away as well. Speaking of which, we're also going to be utilizing Chariot of Victory, Haunted Cloak, and Sword of Vengeance. Chariot of Victory is going to get First Strike, Trample, and Haste. Haunted Cloak gives Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. And Sword of Vengeance gives +2/+0, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. And keep in mind, in many ways with this combo, Trample is essentially unblockability because our opponents can essentially just throw any number of creatures. Doesn't matter how many creatures they throw in front of our Crackdown Construct, when it essentially has infinite power, that trample damage is going to go through. But again, in many ways, these can also be utilized for Oswald's activations as well if we need to. And finally, let's also talk about Loxodon Warhammer, Batterbone, and Ring of Valkis. Loxodon Warhammer is going to get +3/+0, Trample, and Lifelink, which is incredible with this combo. So this is basically, okay, you're taking one player out thanks to that Trample, and then the Lifelink is like, okay, you gain essentially infinite life? So even if your other surviving opponents can somehow try to slow you down, they're going to have to get around that infinite life, and of course, there's only a certain number of ways to actually do that. Either, milling you, or, commander damage, or, an alternative win condition, but still, the normal route to take you out is now pretty much gone. So because of that, we're also going to be utilizing Batterbone, which has Living Weapon, equipped creature gets ++1, and Vigilance, and Lifelink. Again, keep in mind with this having Living Weapon, when it comes into play, we get a 0/0 germ that this is attached to, and of course, we can utilize Oswald to sacrifice that germ to, maybe go get Shuko. But yeah, if we want to pad our life total quite a bit again with that Crackdown Construct just to make ourselves a bit safer, we can. And of course, we're also going to be utilizing Ring of Valkis, which is just going to give equipped creature haste, which is great again for our commander and for the construct. And speaking of haste, we're also going to be running Swiftfoot Boots, which is a fantastic card, especially in this deck. Hexproof and haste for the equipped creature. And yeah, obviously that works very well with either Oswald or again with our Crackdown Construct. So of course, we're also going to be running 2 other equipment that can give Hexproof for the Mask of Avacyn and Mirror Shield. And yeah, they do some other things too, but the main thing is, again, Hexproof. That is very much an important thing to protect our combo and to protect our commander while we're getting set up. And speaking of protection, we're also going to be running cards like Blacksmith Skill, God's Willing, and Emerge Unscathed. Blacksmith Skill says target permanent gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. If it's an artifact, creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So this can protect either, our commander or again Crackdown Construct in a ton of situations. And that +2/+2 for our construct, well, really doesn't matter, but it's kind of funny. But then there's God's Willing, which says target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, scry 1. And protection like this can be a fantastic way to actually get our construct through in many situations, or, to protect it from target removal. So we're also going to be running Emerge Unscathed, which says target creature control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, and it's got Rebound, so on the next turn we get to do it again. So in a pinch, we can protect our construct and still get it through on the next turn. Again, if an opponent only has creatures of a certain color to block, we can get through. But what happens if we actually can't protect one of our key pieces and we need to get it back? Well, that's of course where cards like Mirror Retriever, Workshop Assistant, and Sanctum Gargoyle come into play. Both Mirror Retriever and Workshop Assistant essentially do the exact same thing. When they die, return another target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So of course, Oswald is more than willing to sacrifice these artifacts to get us what we need. And, to tutor for another thing that we definitely need. Sanctum Gargoyle is somewhat similar. It has when it enters the battlefield, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Moving on though, we can return even more things to our hand with Scrap Trawler. It has whenever it or another artifact you control spin a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser mana value. Next up, how about the Underworld Cookbook, which can help us out in a lot of ways. It has tap, discard a card, create a food token, and again, like I mentioned earlier with treasure tokens, food tokens have a converted mana cost of 0, so let's sacrifice them for Shuko. And of course, on top of that, pay for, tap, sacrifice the Underworld Cookbook, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So again, if the construct is dealt with, this is a good way to get it back. Speaking of which, there's trading posts which can do a lot of things. Pay 1 and tap to do one of 4 things. Discard a card, gain 4 life, pay 1 life, create a 0/1 goat creature token, sacrifice a creature, turn target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. Again, keep in mind with Liquid Metal Torque that I mentioned earlier, we actually can utilize that goat to go get Shuko if we can turn that goat into an artifact creature. But of course, we can get a lot more things back with something like Brilliant Restoration, which says return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This can be a great way to surprise an opponent and to take them out of essentially nowhere if they think they've dealt with our combo pieces and we get everything back into play. Yeah, we can probably hastily swing and take out a player. And speaking of taking things out, there's Dusk, which can destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, which is fantastic because, again, obviously our commander gets underneath that, but so does Crackdown Construct because it's a 2/2, so just don't activate, your combo until you just destroy all the creatures on the board except for yours. And then, of course, the Aftermath side, Dawn can help us out as well. Return all creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand, which, again, counts Crackdown Construct. But, of course, we're not quite done with our Wraths just yet. Because we're also going to be running cards like Divine Reckoning, Cleansing Nova, and Austere Command. Divine Reckoning says each player chooses a creature they control, destroy the rest. Cleansing Nova says choose 1, destroy all creatures, or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. And Austere Command is even more flexible. Choose 2, destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with a converted mana cost 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with a converted mana cost 4 or greater. Regardless, these can be really fantastic wraths that can help us out in a lot of situations. But we also have some target removal that can help us out as well with cards like Unexpectedly Absent, Oblation, and Dispatch. Unexpectedly Absent says put target non-land permanent into its owner's library just beneath the top X cards of that library. This can actually be utilized in a defensive way as well. Let's say someone's trying to take out our Crackdown Construct. Well, we can just basically get it back into our library and then get it back out with our commander. So in a similar way, we've got Oblation, which says the owner of target non-land permanent shovels into their library, then draws 2 cards. Yeah, we can use that on an opponent's thing, but we can also just utilize it on Crackdown Construct to save it. But then next up, we've got Dispatch, which is a fantastic card in this deck. It says tap target creature, but instead if we've got Mellowcraft, which again, we're running a ton of artifacts in this deck, we get to exile that creature instead. But of course, we've got more cards for removal with cards like Crush Contraband, Dispeller's Capsule, and Citizen's Crowbar. Crush Contraband says choose 1 or both, exile target artifact or exile target enchantment. And then we can sacrifice Dispeller's Capsule, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and Citizen's Crowbar is somewhat similar. When it enters the battlefield, we get a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token and attach this crowbar to it. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, and we can pay a white and tap and sacrifice the crowbar to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And of course, keep in mind again with that citizen creature token, though it's not an artifact, if we use something like Liquid Metal Torque to turn it into an artifact creature, again, we can go get Shuko. But of course, these are just great cards to tutor for if we really need to get rid of something. And now let's also talk about some ways to dig deeper into our deck with some value cards like Chromatic Star, Terrarian, and Implement of Improvement. Each of these do a variety of things, but the most important thing is that when they're put away graveyard from the battlefield, we draw a card. So by utilizing these with our commander, we can go tutor for something that has a CMC of 2, and then we also just get to draw a card in the process. And speaking of CMC 2, well, we've got Ichor Wellspring and Eye of Vecna to talk about. Ichor Wellspring has when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So it's basically 2 mana, draw 2. And then Eye of Vecna is going to draw a card when it comes into play and we lose 2 life. In the beginning of our upkeep, we can pay 2, and if we do, we draw a card and lose 2 life. So if we really need to start digging for some cards, this can really help us. Next up, we also have some spells that can help too, like Your Temple is Under Attack, Secret Rendezvous, and Cut a Deal. Your Temple is Under Attack is a really fantastic and flexible spell. It says choose 1, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, or you and target opponent each draw 2 cards. So this is a fantastic way to protect our team, or to just get some card advantage with an opponent and probably make a deal with that. And speaking of deals, you and target opponent each draw 3 cards is what Secret Rendezvous does, so yeah, let's make some deals. And with Cut a Deal, it says each opponent draws a card, then you draw a card for each opponent who drew a card this way. So if all 3 of our opponents are still around, this is basically draw 3 for 3. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the lands. And first up, we've got 3 incredible lands in this deck because these are actually artifact lands with Ancient Den, Darksteel Citadel, and Power Depot. It really doesn't matter what these lands do. The fact that they are a 0 mana artifact is incredible because, again, like I've said a couple times before, Shuko. We can sacrifice one of these lands to just go get Shuko and get it right into play. Speaking of which, we also have Mishra's Factory, which has pay 1 and it becomes a 2/2 Assembly Worker artifact creature until end of turn. So yeah, we can sacrifice this as well. Next up, there's Valdaran Estate, which has pay 5 and tap, create a blood token. So again, that blood token is another way to go get Shuko. And then of course there's Foundry of the Consuls, which has pay 5 tap, sacrifice it, make 2 1/1 Thopter artifact creature tokens. So again, if we really need to, Shuko. Moving on, we've got some lands that can help get our construct through with Access Tunnel and Rogue's Passage. Again, our Crackdown construct starts off with just 2 power, so pay 3 and tap target creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn. And then Rogue's Passage can make any creature unblockable, pay 4 and tap target creature can't be blocked this turn. Moving on, we've got some ways to get our combo pieces back. Sequestered Sash is going to get an artifact from our graveyard on top of our library, and Buried Ruin is going to get an artifact back to our hand. And then Phyrexia's Core has pay 1 tap, sacrifice an artifact, you gain 1 life. And finally, the rest of the deck is going to be rounded out with Plains. And now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned before at the start of this episode, this is a very budget-friendly deck with every single card in the deck, including the commander, being less than $1. So the estimated cost for this deck is just $23.18. And actually, that estimated cost does include basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those basics, there's some extra savings there. And speaking of potential savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.